The crystal chandeliers of the Pierre Hotel had witnessed countless scandals, but none quite as piercing as the moment Elena upended the busboy's basin of gray, lukewarm water onto Lucas's mismatched suit. She believed she was washing away the stain of a mediocre husband to clear her path to the executive suite, oblivious to the fact that the man standing dripping before her didn't just work for the company, he was the ghost signature on every paycheck her family had ever cashed. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was the sound of a life fracturing beyond repair. If you find yourself drawn to the jagged edges of broken vows and the dangerous silence before the truth explodes, stay with me as we unravel what happens when the mask finally slips. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel tasted of expensive perfume and stale ambition. It was the night of the Vanguard Holdings Winter Gala, an event where net worth was measured by the cut of a tuxedo and the geometry of diamonds on a neckline. Elena Vance stood near the periphery of the room, her fingers gripping the stem of her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wore a dress that cost 3 months of Lucas's rent, or what she assumed was his rent share, a shimmering emerald silk that clung to her like a second skin. It was armor. Tonight was the night that Julian had promised the VP announcement would be made. "Stop fidgeting," a voice whispered behind her. Elena didn't turn. She knew the cadence of her husband's voice, the low, steady thrum that used to comfort her, but now only irritated her. Lucas stood beside her, holding a glass of sparkling water. He wore the same charcoal suit he had worn to her cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It was clean, pressed, and painfully unremarkable. In a room full of sharks in bespoke Italian wool, Lucas looked like bait. "Stop fidgeting," Elena hissed, scanning the crowd for Julian. "I'm networking, something you wouldn't understand." Lucas took a sip of his water, his dark eyes scanning the room with a detachment that Elena mistook for simple-mindedness. "I understand enough. They're vultures, Elle. You don't have to impress them." "These vultures pay for the roof over our heads, Lucas," she snapped, turning to face him. Her eyes darted to her cousins across the room who were huddled near the buffet, watching her with hungry expectation. Her father had texted her 3 times already. "Is the boss happy? Did you mention my transfer?" "I pay for the roof, Elena. You pay for the lifestyle." "Don't start," she warned, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're lucky I even let you come. Julian said it would be better if I came alone. And look at you." She gestured vaguely at his attire. "You reflect stagnation." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, with an expression she couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Disappointment. "Is that what I am? Stagnation?" "You write code for startups that fail, Lucas. My entire family works for Vanguard. I am on the verge of running this division. We are not the same." The heat in the room seemed to spike. Elena felt the gaze of the room on her. She saw Julian across the floor, raising a glass to her, his smile sharp and knowing. Then she looked back at Lucas, who stood there like a stone in the middle of her river, unmoving, unimpressed. "I think I'll go," Lucas said quietly. "This isn't my scene." "No," Elena said, panic flaring. "If he left now, it would look like a scene. You stay until the speeches are done. Don't embarrass me by walking out." "I'm embarrassing you by standing here, Elena. You can't have it both ways." They had drifted towards the service corridor, away from the main crush of bodies. A busboy was maneuvering a heavy cart laden with dirty plates, half-empty glasses, and a gray plastic basin filled with melted ice and dregs. "You are so selfish," Elena said, her voice rising slightly, the alcohol loosening her control. "I have worked my feelers to the bone for this, and you just stand there, judging me." "I'm not judging you for working hard. I'm judging you for who you're becoming." That was the spark, the arrogance, the quiet moral superiority he always wore like a shield. It infuriated her. Without thinking, blinded by the need to hurt him as much as she felt stifled by him, Elena lashed out. She grabbed the edge of the gray basin on the passing cart. It wasn't an accident. The motion was jagged, deliberate. She tipped it. The slurry of dirty water, lemon rinds, and cigarette ash cascaded over the front of Lucas's charcoal suit. It splashed onto his shoes and soaked into his white shirt, turning the fabric translucent and gray. The clatter of the basin hitting the floor was the only sound loud enough to cut through the ambient jazz. A radius of silence expanded around them instantly. The busboy gasped, freezing in terror. Faces turned, conversations died. Julian, standing 20 feet away, paused with his drink halfway to his lips, a smirk ghosting his face. Lucas didn't jump. He didn't shout. He stood there, water dripping from his chin, the dirty stain spreading across his chest like a map of a dark continent. He wiped a drop of gray water from his cheek. His eyes were dry, dark, and terrifyingly calm. "I hope it was worth it, Elena." His voice was low, but in the silence it carried like a thunderclap.
The silence in the ballroom didn't last, of course. It was New York. Silence was just a vacuum waiting to be filled with gossip. As the initial shock waned, a low murmur rippled through the crowd, a collective intake of breath that sounded like 1,000 snakes hissing at once. Lucas didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the busboy, who was stammering apologies and reaching for a napkin with trembling hands. Lucas only looked at Elena. For a moment, Elena expected him to scream. She expected the release of a fight, the familiar dynamic where she was the ambitious victim and he was the anchor dragging her down. She wanted him to make a scene so she could justify what she had just done. "See," she wanted to tell the room, "see how unstable he is?" But Lucas denied her that satisfaction. He reached into his soaked jacket pocket, pulled out a wet, crumpled $5 bill, and placed it gently on the busboy's tray. "It's not your fault, son," Lucas said. His voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that was currently shaking Elena's entire body. Then he turned his back on her. "Lucas?" Elena said, her voice cracking. It wasn't a plea, it was an involuntary reflex, the sudden terrified realization of gravity after pushing someone off a ledge. He didn't stop. He walked away from her, his wet shoes squeaking faintly against the polished marble floor. The crowd parted for him, not out of respect, but out of the sheer awkwardness of the spectacle. He was a pariah, a walking stain in a room of pristine silk and wool. Elena watched his back. The slump of his shoulder she had always detested now looked strangely like the posture of a man unburdening himself. "Let him go, Elle." The hand on her shoulder was warm, heavy, and smelled of sandalwood. Julian. He stepped into the space Lucas had vacated, his presence instantly shielding her from the harshest glares. He ruined my dress," Elena stammered, looking down at the splatter of gray water on her emerald silk. She was rewriting the narrative in real time, lying to herself before the truth could settle in. "He provoked me." "He's a dead weight," Julian whispered near her ear, turning her slightly so her back was to the exit. "Tonight is about you. Don't let a loser like that tarnish your moment. The board is watching." Elena looked up. Across the room, her mother was clutching her father's arm, her face a mask of horrified embarrassment. But as Julian wrapped an arm around Elena, a gesture that was possessive, almost territorial, her parents' expressions shifted. They saw the director of marketing claiming their daughter. The shame in their eyes was replaced by a calculating relief. Lucas pushed through the heavy revolving doors of the Pierre and stepped out onto Fifth Avenue. The winter rain was falling in sheets, cold and biting. He didn't hail a cab, he didn't run for cover. He simply stood on the sidewalk, letting the freezing rain wash over him. It mingled with the dirty dishwater soaking his shirt, diluting the filth, cleansing him in a way that felt almost religious. He shivered, but not from the cold. The last 3 years played out in his mind like a film reel burning up. The small apartment he had insisted they live in to keep her grounded, the late nights he spent coding, which were actually spent managing the acquisition of 3 logistical firms in Asia. The test. Can you love me without the portfolio? The answer was staining his shirt.
Lucas reached into his trousers, retrieving a phone that was sleek, black, and decidedly different from the cracked model he used in front of Elena. He wiped the screen on a dry patch of his sleeve and dialed a number. It rang once. "Mr. Vance?" Anderson answered. Sharp, alert. It was Anderson, the chief legal counsel for Vanguard Holdings. "I'm done, Anderson," Lucas said. His voice was rough, scraping against his throat. "Sir." "The experiment. It's over." Lucas watched a limousine glide past, the red taillights smearing in the rain. "Draft the papers. And call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Mandatory attendance." "Of course." "What is the agenda?" Lucas looked back at the golden glow of the hotel windows, where his wife was likely sipping fresh champagne, laughing too loudly at a joke Julian had just made. "Restructuring," Lucas said. "And I'll be taking the chair." He hung up and tossed the phone into his other pocket. He didn't look back at the hotel again. He began to walk down the avenue, a solitary figure in the rain. No longer the husband of a junior executive, but the man who owned the pavement she walked on. Back inside, the music had swelled, drowning out the memory of the incident. Elena stood in the circle of Julian's colleagues, laughing at a witticism she hadn't heard. The champagne tasted metallic in her mouth. Every time the doors opened, she flinched, expecting Lucas to return, to beg, to apologize. But the doors stayed closed, and for the first time in her marriage, Elena felt a draft in the room that no amount of heating could fix.
The town car ride back to the Upper West Side had been intoxicating. Julian had been everything Elena thought she wanted. Attentive, powerful, his hand resting heavily on her knee as he murmured promises about the corner office and the new era of her career. He hadn't come up. He claimed an early flight to Chicago for a client meeting, dropping her off at the curb with a kiss that tasted of scotch and victory. But as the taillights of his Mercedes dissolved into the rainy night, the adrenaline began to evaporate, leaving Elena shivering in the lobby of her pre-war building. The elevator up to the 14th floor felt longer than usual. The silence in the hallway was thick, pressing against her eardrums. She keyed into apartment 14B, steeling herself for what she would find on the other side. She expected Lucas to be sitting on the sofa in the dark, nursing a cheap beer, waiting to guilt-trip her. She had her speech ready. She would tell him that tonight was a necessary casualty of success, and that if he couldn't handle the pressure of her world, he should stay in his. "Lucas?" she called out as she pushed the door open. Her voice didn't echo, but it fell flat, absorbed instantly by a stillness that felt unnatural. The living room lights were off. The street lamp outside cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor. The sofa was empty. The throw blanket Lucas usually kept folded over the armrest was gone. Elena frowned, kicking off her heels near the entryway. The relief of being barefoot was instantly replaced by a creeping unease. "Lucas, stop playing games. I'm tired." She walked down the hallway to the bedroom, flipping the light switch with an aggressive snap. The bed was made, perfectly, militarily made, but it was the closet door, left slightly ajar, that drew her eye. Elena walked over and pulled it open. A gasp stuck in her throat, sharp and painful. The right side of the walk-in closet, usually crowded with Lucas's flannel shirts, his 2 suits, and his worn-out hoodies, was bare. It wasn't just empty, it was sterile. There were no wire hangers left on the rod, no stray socks on the floor, no dust bunnies where his youth used to sit. It didn't look like someone had packed in a rage. It looked like someone had been erased. She spun around, checking the dresser. The top drawer was empty. The nightstand was cleared of his books and his phone charger. "He couldn't have," she whispered, the anger rising to cover the panic. "He couldn't have done this in 2 hours." She rushed to the bathroom. His toothbrush was gone. His razor, the bottle of cologne she had bought him 5 years ago that he rarely wore, gone. Elena backed out of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a reaction to the party. This was an extraction. It was too clean, too methodical. She wandered into the kitchen, needing a glass of water to wash down the metallic taste of fear. That was when she saw it. On the granite island, sitting alone in the center of the vast cold surface, was a thick manila envelope. Next to it sat the small velvet box from Tiffany's, the bracelet she had bought for herself earlier that week to celebrate the promotion she hadn't technically received yet. Elena approached the counter slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. She recognized the envelope. It was legal stationery. She opened it, her fingers trembling slightly. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. Elena scanned the document, her eyes blurring over the legal jargon. Irreconcilable, differences, equitable distribution, waiver of spousal support. But her eyes locked onto the signature page at the back. Lucas had signed it. But it wasn't the signature that made her knees buckle. It was the date. October 14th. Elena grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. October. That was 3 months ago. That was the week she had forgotten their anniversary because she was in the Hamptons with the executive team. That was the week she had told him over a distracted phone call that he needed to find a hobby because he was suffocating her. He hadn't come up because of the water. He hadn't left because of the humiliation at the Pierre. He had been ready to leave for 90 days. He had the papers drafted, signed, and ready. He stayed. He waited. Why? To see if she would change? To give her one last chance to be the woman he married instead of the executive she created? She looked at the Tiffany's box, then at the divorce papers. The juxtaposition was cruel. One represented the life she thought she was building. The other represented the foundation she unknowingly let rot. "You coward," she hissed into the empty room, tears pricking her eyes. Tears of rage, she told herself, not grief. "You planned this. You were just waiting for an excuse." She grabbed the papers and threw them on the floor. They fanned out, white sheets scattering like surrender flags. She wanted to call him. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he would starve without her salary, that he would come crawling back when he realized the world didn't care about soft-spoken men with no ambition. But as she reached for her phone, she realized that she didn't know where he would go. He had no family in the city. His friends were online, invisible people she had never bothered to meet. She realized that with a sickening jolt that she knew the names of the entire Vanguard board of directors, but she didn't know the name of a single person her husband would call in an emergency. The apartment, usually her sanctuary of status, suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was judgmental. Elena sank onto the kitchen stool, the silence ringing in her ears. She was alone. Finally. Truly, successfully alone. And for the first time in years, she was terrified.
Elena didn't sleep. She spent the hours between 3 a.m. and sunrise sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty space in the closet. When the alarm finally went off, it felt redundant. She moved through her morning routine with the mechanical precision of a soldier preparing for battle. Shower, coffee, black, scalding, makeup applied with surgical care to hide the purple crescents under her eyes. She put on her sharpest blazer, a tailored white piece that screamed authority. Today was the day. Julian had promised. The VP title would be hers, and with it, the validation that her sacrifices, including the empty side of the bed, were worth it. She told herself Lucas would come back. He always did. He was probably at a cheap motel waiting for her to call. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Not today. But as her Uber pulled up to the glass monolith of Vanguard Holdings, the narrative in her head faltered. Usually, the plaza in front of the building was a stream of caffeinated professionals moving with purposeful rhythm. Today, it was a dam. People were clustered near the revolving doors, murmuring, checking their phones. Elena paid the driver and stepped out. The rain had stopped, leaving the city scrubbed clean and gray. She marched toward the entrance, flashing her executive badge at the turnstile. It didn't beep. It didn't turn. A red light flashed. Access denied. "Excuse me," she said, frustration sharpening her tone. She looked at the security guard, a man she had nodded to for 5 years. "Jerry, the machine is acting up. Buzz me in." Jerry didn't smile. He didn't even look her in the eye. "I can't do that, Miss Vance. We've been ordered to reset all clearances manually. You'll have to go to the front desk." "I am the director of marketing," Elena snapped, the stress of the weekend leaking out. "I have no time for administrative glitches. Is Julian Thorne in yet?" "Mr. Thorne is already upstairs, but you still need to verify." Elena huffed, marching to the front desk. It took 10 humiliating minutes to get a temporary pass. By the time she reached the elevator, her phone was vibrating incessantly. Dad, 3 missed calls. Mom, 2 missed calls. Mark, brother, text, "Elle, what's going on? My key card isn't working at the logistics branch. Managers are saying something about a freeze?" Elena silenced the phone. She couldn't deal with them now. They were small fish in the Vanguard ecosystem. She was a shark. Whatever glitch was hitting the subsidiaries wouldn't touch the C-suite. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, and the silence hit her harder than the noise downstairs. The marketing floor was usually a hive of creative energy, music playing low, interns running with coffee. Today, it was dead quiet. But it wasn't empty. Men and women in nondescript gray suits were moving from cubicle to cubicle. They carried banker's boxes. They were unplugging hard drives. Auditors. Elena's stomach dropped. This wasn't a glitch. This was a raid. She walked briskly toward her office, her heels clicking loudly on the polished concrete. She passed the conference room. Inside, the entire sales team was sitting around the table, looking pale. They weren't working. They were waiting. She burst into her office, expecting to find sanctuary. Instead, she found a woman in a gray blazer sitting at her desk, typing on her computer. "Excuse me?" Elena said, her voice trembling with indignation. "Who are you?" The woman didn't stop typing. "External audit. Please take a seat, Miss Vance. Do not touch any files." "This is my office. Get out of my chair," Elena shouted. "Where is Julian?" "Mr. Thorne is in the boardroom," the auditor said calmly, finally looking up. Her eyes were devoid of sympathy. "You are expected there as well. The majority shareholder has called an emergency session. 8 a.m. sharp." The majority shareholder. The ghost. The myth that everyone at Vanguard joked about, but no one had ever seen. The name on the incorporation papers was a holding company based in Singapore. Rumors ranged from a Russian oligarch to a reclusive tech genius. Elena checked her watch. 7:59 a.m. She backed out of her office. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from her father. "Elena, answer me. Security is escorting us out of the building. They said our contracts are under review. Fix this." The walls seemed to be closing in. Her family was being purged. Her office was occupied. Her husband was gone. The only thing left was Julian. She turned and headed toward the executive boardroom at the end of the hall. The double mahogany doors were closed. A heavy security detail stood outside. Not the building rent-a-cops, but private security. Men with earpieces and serious eyes. "Name?" one of them asked. "Elena Vance, Director of Marketing." He checked a list on a tablet. He paused, his finger hovering over her name. "Go inside. Take a seat at the end of the table." Elena pushed the doors open. The room was freezing. The air conditioning was blasting, chilling the sweat on her back. The long oval table was fully occupied. The CFO, the COO, the heads of legal and HR, they were all there. And Julian. Julian sat near the head of the table, but not at the head. He looked terrible. His tie was slightly askew, his face ashen. When Elena walked in, he didn't smile. He didn't beckon her over. He looked away, studying his notepad with intense fascination. The chair at the head of the table was empty. Elena walked to the far end, sinking into the only available leather chair. She felt small. The silence in the room was heavy, pressurized. No one was speaking. No one was checking their phones. They were terrified. "Does anyone know who he is?" the HR director whispered to the COO. "No idea. Legal got the call at 2 a.m. Total lockdown. Someone said he's been buying back shares through shell companies for a decade. He owns 51% outright as of midnight." Elena gripped the armrests. 51%. Absolute control. The heavy doors opened again. The room collectively held its breath. Anderson, the chief legal counsel, walked in first. He looked solemn, carrying a thick binder. He moved to the head of the table, but didn't sit. He stood behind the empty chair, looking around the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Anderson said, his voice crisp, "there has been a significant restructuring of ownership.
the majority shareholder has decided to take an active role in the management of Vanguard Holdings, effective immediately. Elena felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The cadence of Anderson's voice, she had heard it somewhere before. "Please welcome," Anderson continued, stepping aside, "Mr. Lucas Vance." Elena's heart stopped. It didn't skip a beat, it didn't flutter, it just stopped. A figure walked in from the private antechamber door. He was wearing a suit. Not the charcoal one from the night before, and definitely not the mismatched ones he wore at home. This was a bespoke navy suit, tailored to perfection. He moved with a grace and authority she had never seen, or perhaps never bothered to look for. He walked to the head of the table. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at Julian. His dark eyes traveled down the length of the mahogany table, past the terrified executives, past the trembling Julian, until they locked onto Elena at the very end. "Good morning," Lucas said.
The silence that followed Lucas's greeting was different from the silence in the ballroom. The ballroom silence had been social, a pause for gossip. The silence in the boardroom was biological, the stillness of prey realizing the predator is already inside the cage. Elena felt the blood drain from her face so fast it left her dizzy. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her fingernails digging into the wood, waiting for the punchline, waiting for Lucas to crack a smile, to say this was some elaborate, twisted revenge prank funded by a lottery win. But Lucas didn't smile. He didn't look at her. He pulled up the heavy leather chair at the head of the table and sat down. The movement was fluid, practiced. He placed a single slim tablet on the surface. "Please sit," Lucas said to Anderson, the general counsel, who took the seat to his right. "Mr. Vance, the ownership structure had evolved?" "It hasn't evolved, Finding. It has been static for 10 years. I simply chose to remain a silent partner. Until now." He topped the tablet. The large screen behind him flickered to life. It displayed a complex organizational chart of Vanguard Holdings. Large sections of it were highlighted in red. "For the past 3 years, I have watched this company drift." He spoke with a vocabulary and cadence Elena had never heard from him. Gone was the soft, mumbled agreement over dinner. This was the sharp, clipped tone of a man who measured time in millions of dollars. "We have bloated middle management, stagnant innovation in the tech sector, and a culture of nepotism that is bleeding our subsidiaries dry." Elena felt like the room was tilting. Nepotism. The word hung in the air like smoke. Lucas continued, "I have sent in independent auditors this morning. The results were disappointing." "Sir," Julian spoke up. His voice was too loud, too eager. He leaned forward, flashing the charismatic smile that usually worked on clients. "We are—" "Mr. Thorne," Lucas cut him off. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look up from his tablet. "I have read your reports. I have also read the expenses. Client dinners that cost more than the contracts they secured. Consulting fees paid to firms that don't exist." Julian's mouth snapped shut. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, visible even from where Elena sat. "And," Lucas said, finally looking up, his eyes landed on Julian, cold and hard as flint. "And I have observed a troubling lack of judgment in leadership. Personnel decisions based on personal entanglements rather than merit." The air left Elena's lungs. He knew. She stared at the man at the head of the table. This was the man who had plunged from toilet last week. This was the man she had yelled at for buying the wrong brand of almond milk. This was the man she had called stagnant. How? How had he hidden this? Memories flashed through her mind, recontextualized in horror. The late nights he spent coding. He was running the Asian markets. The way he never worried about bills, not because he was mooching off of her, but because money was irrelevant to him. The way he listened to her complain about work with that quiet, almost pitying expression. He thought he was intimidated by her world. In reality, he was patiently tolerating her role in his world. "We are restructuring," Lucas announced, breaking her trance. "Effective immediately,
all subsidiary contracts are suspended pending review. That includes the logistics contracts in New Jersey. Elena's heart lurched. Her father, her brother. That was why their badges didn't work. Lucas hadn't just fired them, he had paused the entire division to do it legally. This seems extreme, the CFO ventured cautiously. Extreme is pouring dirty water on a problem and hoping it washes away, Lucas said enigmatically. Efficiency is removing the source of the dirt. Elena flinched. It was the only reference he made to the night before. No one else understood it, but to her, it was a knife to the gut. Lucas stood up. The meeting had lasted less than 10 minutes. Anderson will handle the individual reviews, Lucas said. Mr. Thorne, please remain. The rest of you return to your offices. You have work to do if you wish to keep your positions. The executives scrambled to leave, desperate to escape the blast radius. Elena stood up on shaky legs. She needed to get out. She needed to vomit. Mrs. Vance, Lucas's voice stopped her at the door. She froze. The room emptied until only 3 people remained. Lucas, Julian, and Elena. Anderson stood silently by the window, a sentinel. Elena turned slowly. She tried to summon the face of the director of marketing, the face of the wife, the face of anything other than the fraud she felt like she was. Lucas, she whispered. Sit down, Elena, he said. It wasn't a request. She sat. Julian was already sitting, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Lucas walked around the table. He didn't come to comfort her. He leaned against the edge of the table, crossing his arms over his chest. The posture was casual, dominant. Now, Lucas said, looking between his wife and his lover, let's discuss the concept of dead weight. Julian went pale. Sir, I didn't know who you were. Would it have mattered if I was just a waiter? Lucas asked softly. Or is respect something you only offer to people who sign your checks? He turned to Elena. His eyes were unreadable. There was no love in them. There was no hate. There was only the clinical detachment of an auditor inspecting a bad investment. And you, he said to her, you wanted a husband with ambition. You wanted a man who commanded the room. He gestured to the empty chairs, the terrified silence of the office outside, and the trembling lover beside her. Are you happy now, Elena?
The question hung in the recycled air of the boardroom, heavy and suffocating. Elena looked at Lucas, searching for a trace of the man who used to make her coffee every morning. She found only the chairman. His face was a mask of professional inquiry, as if he were asking about a quarterly projection rather than the destruction of their lives. Before Elena could answer, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke the tension. Mr. Vance? Julian started, his voice pitching higher than usual. He stood up, smoothing his tie with erratic, jerky movements. I want to be clear, I had no idea regarding your relationship with Elena, Miss Vance. Lucas shifted his gaze slowly from Elena to Julian. You didn't know she was married? I knew she was married, Julian said quickly, sweat glistening on his upper lip, but the nature of her domestic situation, she presented it as... She faltered, glancing at Elena, not with love, but with accusation. She told me the marriage was effectively over, that it was a formality. I was under the impression I was supporting a colleague through a difficult separation. Julian? Elena whispered. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on Julian, desperate to find a lifeline. I value my position at Vanguard, sir. I have given 10 years to this firm. If my judgment was clouded, it was because I was misled regarding the availability of a subordinate. Misled. Subordinate. The words hit Elena like physical blows. This was the man who, just 24 hours ago, had held her hand in the back of a town car and promised they would rule the industry together. The man who had mocked Lucas for being dead weight. Now, faced with the actual weight of power, Julian was cutting her loose to keep his head above water. Misled, Lucas repeated, testing the word. He reached for the folder Anderson was holding and slid it across the polished mahogany. It stopped perfectly in front of Julian. Open it. Julian hesitated, then flipped the cover. Elena couldn't see the contents, but she saw the color drain from Julian's face until he looked like wet chalk. That is a log of corporate expenses, Lucas said, his voice dangerously level. The weekends in the Hamptons, the dinners at Le Bernardin, the suite at the Pierre last night, all charged to the marketing budget under client acquisition. Lucas leaned forward slightly. Who was the client, Julian? My wife? The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just me, Julian stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. She signed off on the expense reports. She approved the allocation. It was her idea to book the suite for the gala prep. I gasped. That is a lie. You told me it was standard protocol for the executive team. You wanted to impress your family, Julian shouted back, finally looking at her, his eyes wild with panic. Don't drag me down because you have an inferiority complex. Enough, Lucas said. The word was spoken softly, but it silenced them instantly. Lucas stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the gray skyline of Manhattan. He didn't look angry, he looked bored, and that hurt Elena more than any rage could. It meant she wasn't a heartbreak to him anymore. She was just a human resources issue. I'm not firing you for sleeping with my wife, Julian, Lucas said to the glass. That's a personal failing, and frankly, I don't mix personal grievances with business. He turned around. I'm firing you for theft and for being stupid enough to leave a paper trail. Lucas, please, Julian begged, his dignity completely gone. I can repay the expenses. I can... Anderson, escort Mr. Torn out. Security is waiting in the hall. He has 5 minutes to clear his desk. Anything he doesn't pack gets shredded. Anderson stepped forward, placing a hand on Julian's arm. Julian looked at Elena one last time, a look of pure, unfiltered hatred, before allowing himself to be let out. The heavy doors clicked shut. Elena was alone with Lucas. She sat frozen in her chair, the silence roaring in her ears. She felt stripped, naked. The love she had destroyed her marriage for had evaporated in less than 3 minutes of pressure. She had thrown away a man of integrity for a man who sold her out for a paycheck. Lucas walked back to the head of the table. He began organizing his papers, stacking them neatly. Lucas, Elena said, her voice shaking. She stood up, her legs feeling like jelly. I didn't know he was... You didn't know he was a coward? Lucas finished for her, not looking up. You're a director of marketing, Elena. You're supposed to be an expert on branding. You bought a flashy package with nothing inside. I'm sorry, she choked out. About the water. About everything. Lucas finally looked at her. His eyes were tired. The water didn't matter, Elle. It was just water. It dries. Then what? She asked, tears spilling over. What mattered? The fact that you needed me to be small so you could feel big. And now that you know I'm not small, you don't look happy. You look terrified. He picked up his tablet and the expense folder. Pack your things, Elena, he said, walking toward the door. Am I fired? She whispered. Lucas paused, his hand on the brass handle. He looked back at her, and for a split second she saw the ghost of the husband who used to hold her when she cried. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the CEO. No, I'm not firing you. You're good at your job when you're not distracted, but you report to the new VP of marketing now. Who? She asked. Me. See you at the 9 a.m. briefing. He walked out, leaving her standing in the cold, empty boardroom, trapped in the job she worshipped, working for the husband she had betrayed.
The sun had long since dipped behind the Hudson, leaving Manhattan wrapped in a cold, electric twilight. The 50th floor of Vanguard Holdings was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the HVAC system and the occasional distant wail of a siren from the streets below. Elena stood outside the double-glass doors of the CEO's suite. She had spent the last 8 hours in a fugue state, dodging the pitying stares of the support staff and the terrified glances of the surviving executives. She had packed a box of personal items, then unpacked it, then packed it again, unable to decide if she was leaving or staying. But she couldn't leave. Not like this. She pushed the door open. The office was cavernous. It was 3 times the size of Julian's, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the empire Lucas now openly ruled. He was sitting at a desk made of reclaimed wood, simple, stark, and likely costing more than her car. He wasn't looking at the view. He was reading a document under the glow of a single brass lamp. "I didn't schedule an appointment," Elena said from the doorway. Her voice sounded thin in the vast space. Lucas didn't startle. He finished the paragraph he was reading, signed the bottom of the page, and closed the folder. Only then did he look up. "It's late, Elena. The building is clearing out." "I needed to talk to you," she said, stepping further into the room. The carpet was plush. Her heels made no sound. "Not as your employee, as your wife." Lucas leaned back in his chair, interlacing his fingers. "I'm not sure that role exists anymore. The paperwork on your kitchen counter suggests otherwise." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question burst out of her, desperate and accusing. 3 years, Lucas. 3 years you let me think we were struggling. You let me worry about rent. You let me look down on you." "I didn't let you look down on me," Lucas corrected gently. "You chose to look down on me. There's a difference." "But why?" Elena walked until she was standing just across the desk from him. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, but the air around him felt charged, impenetrable. Was it a test? Some cruel game to see if I was worthy? Lucas stood up and walked to the window. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass, a ghost superimposed over the city lights. "My father started this company," Lucas said. "He died when I was 22. Everyone who came into my life after that, friends, girlfriends, distant cousins, they all looked at me and sought a walking ATM. They didn't hear my jokes, they heard the jingle of coins. They didn't care about my thoughts, they cared about my influence." He turned to face her. "When I met you at that coffee shop, you didn't know who I was. You argued with me about a book. You laughed at my terrible shirt. You saw me." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She remembered that day. She remembered falling for his quiet intelligence, his kindness. "I wanted to keep that," Lucas continued. "I wanted a life where I came home and my wife asked, 'How was your day?' Not, 'What did you buy?' So I created a firewall. I kept the money separate. I wanted to see if we could build a life on the foundation of who we were, not what I owned." "I did love you," Elena whispered, tears tracking hot paths down her cheeks. "I did, Lucas." "You loved me in the beginning," he conceded, "but then the ambition set in, the comparisons. You started measuring me against the men in this building, men like Julian." He walked back to the desk, resting his hands on the wood. "I watched you change, Elena. I watched you become ashamed of me. I listened to you lie to your friends about what I did. I watched you flirt with Julian at parties because he had the title you coveted. And I waited." "You waited for me to fail," she accused, wiping her eyes. "No," Lucas said, his voice cracking slightly, the first sign of emotion he had shown all day. "I waited for you to stop. I waited for you to realize that the suit doesn't make the man. I gave you every chance to defend me, to respect me." He picked up a paperweight, a heavy glass sphere, and turned it over in his hand. "Last night," he said, "at the Pierre, when you poured that water on me, it wasn't the anger that hurt. It was the contempt. You looked at me like I was dirt that needed to be washed away so you could shine. I was drunk, I was stressed, it was a mistake." "It was a revelation," Lucas countered. "It showed me exactly where I stood. If I had told you the truth a year ago, Elena, would you have stayed?" "Yes." "Would you have stayed because you loved me?" Lucas locked eyes with her. Or would you have stayed because you realized you were married to the owner of Vanguard Holdings? Elena opened her mouth to answer, but the words died in her throat. She wanted to say it was love. She desperately wanted to believe it. But the memory of Julian, the memory of her family's pressure, the memory of her own insatiable hunger for status, it choked her. Lucas saw the hesitation. It was the only answer he needed. "Go home, Elena," he said, his voice returning to that cold, professional flatline. "The legal team will be in touch about the settlement. You can keep the apartment. I never liked it anyway. It was too cold. Lucas, please." She stepped forward, reaching for his hand. He pulled back. It was a small movement, but it put an ocean between them. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight, and tomorrow I'm flying to London to audit the European division. You have a job here if you want it, Elena. You're a good marketer, but that's all I am to you now. An employee." He turned off the brass lamp, plunging the room into the semi-darkness of the city glow. "Please close the door on your way out." She stood there for a long moment, the silhouette of her husband merging with the shadows of the office. She realized then that the ghost owner wasn't a nickname. He was a ghost, and she was the one who had killed the man he used to be. She turned and walked out, the click of the latch behind her sounding like the final beat of a stopping heart.
The resignation letter was short, 2 sentences. It sat on the center of her desk, a stark white island on the dark wood. Elena had spent 10 years writing marketing copy that could sell ice to polar bears, weaving complex narratives about value and aspiration. But for the end of her career at Vanguard Holdings, she found she had no adjectives left. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position as director of marketing. I wish the company continued success. She didn't sign it Elena Vance. She just signed Elena. She placed her security badge on top of the paper. It was a heavy piece of plastic, the key to the executive washroom, the elevator, the inner sanctum of the 50th floor. For years, it had been her most prized possession. Now it felt like a shackle. The office was quiet. The audit team was still swarming the floor, but the panic had settled into a grim, low-humming anxiety. No one made eye contact with her as she packed the last of her things into a single cardboard box. They knew. In the corporate ecosystem, the scent of a fall from grace was potent, and everyone was keeping their distance to avoid the contagion. Elena put on her coat. She didn't look back at the view of the city she thought she had conquered. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and waited. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the bustle of the midday rush hit her. Life was going on. People were buying coffee, checking watches, complaining about the weather. They didn't know that the man who owned the building had just flown to London to escape the memory of his wife. Elena walked toward the revolving doors. She felt lighter, strangely. The fear of being nobody that had driven her for a decade was still there, but it was duller now, overshadowed by the exhaustion of being someone she wasn't. She pushed through the glass doors and stepped out onto the plaza. "Elena! Over here!" The voice was shrill and familiar. Elena stiffened. Her parents and her brother Mark were standing near the fountain, huddled in their coats. They looked frantic. Her father was holding a lit cigarette, something he only did when his money was threatened. They rushed toward her, ignoring the box in her arms. "Did you talk to him?" her father demanded, grabbing her elbow. "Mark's badge still isn't working. The manager at the logistics hub said the freeze is indefinite. Did you tell Lucas to fix it?" "We've been calling you all morning," her mother added, her face pinched with accusation. "We heard rumors, Elle. People are saying Julian got fired. Is it true? Is Lucas really the owner?" "It's true," Elena said quietly. Her brother's eyes went wide. "Holy shit. Lucas? The guy who drives that beat-up Honda? We're rich then. We're actually rich. You need to get him to reinstate us, Elle. And I want a raise. If he's the owner, families should be on the board." Elena looked at them. Really looked at them. She saw the greed etched in the lines of her father's face. She saw the entitlement in her brother's posture. She saw the way her mother was already mentally spending money that wasn't hers. For years, she had blamed Lucas for holding her back. She had thought his lack of ambition was the anchor dragging her down. But as she stood there, with the cold wind biting her cheeks, she realized the anchor hadn't been Lucas. It was them. and it was her need to please them. Lucas had hidden his wealth not just to test her, but to protect himself from this, from the vultures who would pick the meat off his bones if they knew the truth. And she had led the flock right to him. "He's not going to reinstate you," Elena said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the panic they were projecting. "What? He has to. We're family. You're his wife." "Not anymore," Elena said. She shifted the box in her arms. "We're getting divorced. And I just resigned." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the stunned silence of the boardroom. It was the horrified silence of parasites realizing the host had died. You resigned?" her mother screeched. "Are you insane? He's a billionaire, Elena. You don't leave a billionaire. You fix it. You get on your knees and you beg." "Think about us, Al. I have a mortgage. You can't just throw this away because you had a little fight." Elena laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "A little fight? I humiliated him. I betrayed him. And you," she looked at her father, "you never once asked if I was happy. You only asked if the boss was happy. Don't be dramatic. Go back inside. Fix this, now." Elena looked at the revolving doors of Vanguard Holdings. She could go back. She could beg. She could probably leverage the divorce for a massive settlement if she hired a ruthless lawyer. She could fight for her piece of the pie she had inadvertently helped bake. But then she remembered Lucas's eyes in the office last night. The disappointment. The exhaustion. "I waited for you to stop." No. Elena stepped around her father. "Elena! Where are you going?" her mother yelled. "Don't you walk away from us, after everything we sacrificed for you?" "You didn't sacrifice anything. You just invested, and the investment failed." She walked to the curb and raised her hand. A yellow cab swerved toward her. "Elena!" Her family was still shouting, their voices mixing with the noise of the traffic, the wind, the city. They weren't calling her name out of love. They were calling after their lifestyle. She slid into the back seat of the cab and closed the door. The sound of the city was instantly muffled. "Where to?" the driver asked, eyeing her box in the rearview mirror. Elena looked out the window. She saw her family arguing on the sidewalk, blaming each other. She saw the towering glass spire of Vanguard Holdings piercing the sky, the monument to the man she had never bothered to know. She had no job. She had no husband. She had no family she could rely on. She was 32 years old, and she was entirely alone in New York City. She took a deep breath. It was the first breath of air she had taken in years that didn't belong to someone else. "Just drive," Elena said. The cab pulled into traffic, merging with the river of red taillights. Elena watched the building fade into the distance until it was just another part of the skyline, indistinguishable from the rest. She placed her hand on the cold glass of the window, and for the first time, she didn't try to wipe away the condensation. She just watched it fade, ready to start over.